So I was in this really high-stakes presentation just the other day, Tuesday, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we're halfway through the Q3 projections. Everything's going fine, and then the screen just died, PFT, total black.
Oh.
Exactly. And the guy running the meeting, let's call him Dave, he just completely unraveled instantly. Starts stammering, frantically jiggling the HDMI cable, apologizing over and over to the execs.
Oh, the worst feeling.
He was actually sweating. You could just feel the confidence in him. And honestly, the whole multi-million-dollar proposal just kind of evaporate right there. He was totally derailed. But his co-presenter, Anna, she just watched him for a second, didn't move. Then she steps forward, completely calm, and just starts talking.
Really?
Yeah. Laid out the entire rest of the proposal. From memory, no slides, no notes, nothing. She didn't just save the meeting, she commanded it. And what really struck me, it wasn't just that she was more prepared maybe, it was the stillness.
The stillness, right.
Dave was ruined by the event, the screen dying. But Anna, it was like she was operating in a completely different reality where the event itself barely even registered. That moment, that split second where one person goes into chaos and the other finds calm. We've all seen it, probably been there. It's the difference between a flat tire ruining your whole day or you just changing it and moving on.
Exactly.
So what explains that huge gap between Dave's meltdown and Anna's, commanding stillness in the exact same crisis situation? It felt like more than just stress management. It was something deeper. About focus.
Yeah. I think that difference you saw, it wasn't really about the screen dying, was it? It was about where each of them, Dave and Anna, chose to put their energy right after it happened. This whole thing, it really shines a light on this fundamental principle, this split between the event you can't control and the response you can. Dave's energy, all spent raging against, the physical problem, the dead screen.
Right, fighting reality.
Exactly. Anna's energy, spent purely on executing her response. Doing what she could do.
And that brings us right to the core idea we want to dig into today, the Festinger principle. Now, it has roots in social psychology, Leon Festinger, but the idea itself has this powerful truth for our emotional lives, really. It says only about 10% of your life is actually determined by what happens to you, the external stuff. That screen going black, the flat tire, the unexpected bad news, that's the 10%.
Right, the uncontrollable.
The other 90%, that's defined entirely by how you respond. Your internal reaction, your conscious choices, how you deliberately handle it.
Absolutely. The screen dying is the 10%. That's it. The shame, the panic, the stammering, the presentation falling apart, that's Dave's huge, violent 90% reaction to the 10%.
Okay.
Anna's stillness. That was her mastering her 90%. She let the 10% happen, didn't fight it, and immediately took charge of her own actions, her own domain.
So that's our mission for this deep dive then. We're going to explore how this ancient Stoic wisdom actually gives us a practical blueprint for mastering that 90%, for achieving what some call emotional sovereignty.
Emotional sovereignty, yeah. And we'll look at how this applies in really concrete ways, like in high-stakes corporate leadership, in mental health practices, and even in how we educate people today.
Okay, let's unpack this blueprint. The 10%, 90% idea sounds good, feels right somehow, but man, living it seems incredibly hard. Why are we so wired, especially today, to fight that uncontrollable 10%? Why waste all that energy resisting what just is?
Well, it's a really deep human thing, isn't it? It seems driven by this ingrained resistance to reality. And maybe this desire for everything to be smooth. Boundless smoothness, as some sources put it.
Boundless smoothness, I like that. We expect life to be frictionless.
Exactly. Modern life, maybe especially, sort of encourages us to think that if we just plan meticulously enough or worry hard enough, we can somehow force the world to fit our exact expectations. The perfect schedule, the perfect market, perfect health.
Right. And when it inevitably doesn't work out that way.
That's when the trouble starts. The cost of fighting reality, of resisting that 10%, is precisely that huge turmoil we feel. The shame, the anxiety, the why me, self-pity. That's not the cost of the actual event, like the screen dying.
No, the turmoil is the 90% reaction. It's all the emotional energy we pour into fighting the 10%.
Precisely. So emotional stability isn't just something you have. It's the result of actively, philosophically managing that huge gap between our desire for total control and what we can actually control.
And that's where Stoicism comes in. It gives us the tools, the precision to manage that gap with this idea they call the dichotomy of control.
Yeah, the dichotomy of control. It's kind of the cornerstone, championed by Epictetus especially. It's the ultimate reality check, really. It forces you to do this radical sorting exercise with everything in the world.
Okay, radical sorting, how does that work?
It's pretty straightforward, conceptually at least. Stoicism divides everything into two buckets. Bucket one, what's actually within our power. This is our thoughts, our judgments, our opinions, our values, our intentions, our choices, how we respond voluntarily. That's the 90%. Our inner world.
Got it. My internal stuff.
Bucket two, what's outside our power. External events, the weather, what other people think or do, the economy, a screen, dying in a presentation, the 10%. The Stoic insight is that these external things are, frankly, indifferent to our wishes.
Okay, but doesn't that sound a bit fatalistic?
Yeah.
If I just accept, say, the market is outside my control, why even bother trying to build a business or invest? Just give up.
That's a really common misunderstanding, but it's critical. Surrendering to external facts isn't about being passive or giving up. It's about shifting where you apply your energy, your agency.
Oh.
The Stoic understands, look, I can't control the outcome of the market. That's the 10%. But I have absolute control over my effort in analyzing the market, the quality of my analysis, my strategy, and crucially, my character and how I respond to whatever the market does. That's the 90%.
Yeah, so control the input, not the output.
Exactly. True sovereignty, as Epictetus would say, is mastering your inner domain, the 90%. Trying to control the external, the 10%. That's just a recipe for anxiety, disappointment, and wasted effort. It's folly.
Right.
He famously said, the chief task in life is simply this: to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. That clarity is everything for the 90% rule.
That clarity, knowing what's truly yours to manage, that then leads right into the practical side of Stoicism, right? These three disciplines they talk about for training that inner domain. The first one is the discipline of desire.
Yes, the discipline of desire. This forces us to really examine what we're pinning our hopes on, what we're craving emotionally. The Stoics observed that strong, destructive emotions, what they called the passions, like intense fear or rage or even excessive joy, they only really arise when our desires get tangled up with external things we don't control.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. If your desire is absolutely fixed on, I must land this contract, and then you lose it, well, the emotional fallout is huge, right? Devastation.
Yeah, feels like failure.
But if you shift your desire to something internal, like I must prepare and present the absolute best case I possibly can, which is entirely within your control, then losing the contract doesn't feel like an existential crisis. It becomes, well, data, a data point you learn from.
Oh, okay. So focus the desire on the action, not the result.
Precisely. Focus desire on internal goods like pursuing virtue, excellence in your own actions, being the best version of yourself you can be in that moment.
Which leads very naturally to the second discipline, the discipline of action.
Exactly. This is the ethical moral part. It calls us to focus squarely on our own moral character and how we act in the world, striving for excellence, acting justly, cooperating. The Stoics talked about participating in the logos.
Logos. That's like nature or reason.
Yeah, often translated that way. But for them, it was more like the divine rational order underpinning everything. So participating in the logos means acting rationally, fairly, and recognizing we're social creatures meant to work together.
So even if someone else acts badly.
Your job isn't to control them or necessarily match their bad behavior. The discipline of action says, move past your own reactive anger or hurt and focus on fulfilling your role, maintaining your character, acting virtuously despite what they do. It's about your actions, regardless of external provocations.
Right, controlling your 90% even when their 10% hits you.
Okay.
And the final one, the one that seems key for that stillness Anna showed, the discipline of assent or judgment.
This one is crucial. It's the operational switch for controlling the 90%. Assent is about that critical pause. It's refusing to immediately buy into your first impression of an event, which is often distorted by emotion.
So something happens.
Right. An external event occurs, the screen goes black. Instantly, you generate an impression, this is a disaster, I'm going to look like an idiot, this is terrible. The discipline of assent teaches you to hit pause, interject a little delay right there.
And ask.
2 key questions. First, is this impression really what it seems to be? Is it the objective fact or my interpretation? And second, what does this actually have to do with me, with my character, with my ability to choose my response?
So back to Dave. When the screen went black, he immediately assented to the impression, this is a catastrophe, I'm ruined.
Exactly. He swallowed the initial emotional interpretation whole without evaluating it. Anna, on the other hand, instinctively or through practice, paused. She did the judgment check, and she likely assented only to the objective fact. The screen isn't working, which then led to the rational, controlled response. okay, the stream isn't working, therefore I need to switch to delivering this information verbally. That moment of rational evaluation short-circuits the panic. It stops the 10% event from automatically triggering that destructive 90% meltdown.
Okay, that philosophical grounding is so important because that pause, that moment of assent you described, that stillness, that seems to be exactly what separates the really effective leaders from those who just unravel when things get tough.
Absolutely.
And it really matters most when that 10% hits in high-stakes environments. Corporate leadership dealing with the volatile markets, supply chains suddenly breaking, election results, new regulations popping up. The first instinct for a lot of leaders seems to be asking the wrong kind of question, doesn't it?
It really does. The biggest failure point in leadership during uncertain times is often focusing on trying to predict the 10%. The natural anxious question is always, okay, what's going to happen next? Is the Fed raising rates? Will this supply chain mess clear up by Q3?
Trying to nail the prediction.
Right. And they hinge their entire strategy, their whole sense of security, on getting that prediction right. But the wiser approach, the one informed by Stoicism and the 1090 principle, shifts the question completely. It asks, okay, regardless of what happens out there, what are we doing internally to be prepared?
That shift. It's moving from wanting to be right about the future to focusing on being effective right now in the present.
That's it, exactly. And the sources we looked at really emphasize this. Acknowledging uncertainty, actually saying, I don't know about exactly what the future holds, that isn't weakness. It's actually a sign of strength, of agency, of empowerment.
How so?
Because it frees up enormous cognitive energy. Instead of wasting bandwidth trying to model every possible uncontrollable scenario out there, leaders can redirect all that 90% energy toward building actual operational preparedness, making the organization more robust, more flexible. This is where the philosophy directly translates into smart corporate strategy.
We actually have a fantastic story illustrating this. It involves a mid-level manager, let's call her Petra, at a logistics company in Germany. This was right during the peak of the global supply chain crisis in 2021. That crisis, obviously, was the massive, uncontrollable 10%.
Right, a perfect storm. And Petra's company, like many, was facing total internal paralysis. The external chaos, you remember? Ships just stacked up outside ports, crazy delays, fuel costs going through the roof. It was overwhelming. Her senior leadership team, they were just consumed by panic, spending hours and hours in meetings, basically just blaming things they couldn't control, suppliers, foreign governments, the pandemic itself.
Focusing on the 10%.
Completely. And the result was emotional gridlock and operational paralysis. Nothing effective was getting done because they were stuck reacting to the external chaos.
So what did Petra do? Her intervention sounds like pure stoicism on a whiteboard.
It really was. She gathered her small team, and she very deliberately used the dichotomy of control. She drew a big circle on the whiteboard. Everything outside the circle she labeled as the 10%. The jammed ports, the pandemic rules, the global demand mess, things they could not influence.
Okay.
Inside the circle, she wrote down their 90%, what they could control. Things like their communication strategy with their existing clients, how they allocated the few truck slots or warehouse spaces they did have, their own internal work ethic, their team morale, their character. And the rule she enforced was dead simple. From now on, we will not waste one single minute discussing, complaining about, or blaming anything outside the circle.
That's radical.
It was a radical act of collective self-discipline. Did it make the ships move faster? No, of course not. But it stopped the emotional bleeding. It channeled all their available energy, their 90%, into effective action based on the reality they face, not the reality they wish they had.
And the result?
They became known as the one reliable logistics division in their whole region because they weren't paralyzed. They were solving the problems that were actually within their circle of control.
That's powerful. And this idea, committing to the 90%, it connects directly to strategic finance too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Resilience isn't just about attitude. It needs resources, flexibility.
Oh, absolutely. Stoic-based resilience thinking directly informs how smart companies handle their finances, especially in volatile times. For instance, you need liquidity. You need cash on hand to give you options when things get unpredictable.
Right.
That's why things like working capital tools, supply chain finance is a good example, become so strategically important. They unlock cash that might otherwise be stuck in limbo, like in accounts receivable or payable.
And what do companies do with that freed up cash? They invest it in their 90%.
Precisely. They use that liquidity to build resilience. Maybe they diversify their suppliers geographically so they're not reliant on just one region that could get shut down.
Or build up inventory buffers?
Exactly. Create inventory buffers as a hedge against sudden supply shocks. Or invest in long-term sustainability initiatives, which often makes operations more robust and less vulnerable to future disruptions. It's all about proactive investment in internal preparedness, the 90%, rather than just reacting when the 10% crisis inevitably hits.
Is there data on this?
Yeah, there is. One figure cited was that 85% of CFOs are actively using these kinds of working capital solutions specifically to safeguard their businesses against macroeconomic shocks. They are literally funding their ability to respond effectively, funding their 90%.
So the lesson holds true. Leaders aren't really defined by the storm, the 10%, but by the tools, the weapons of reason they bring to navigate it. It reminds me of Marcus Aurelius. Didn't he say something about meeting the future?
He did. It's a fantastic quote. He said, "Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present." Cultivating that internal arsenal, that capacity for rational thought and deliberate action, your 90%, that's arguably the single most powerful competitive advantage any person or any organization can build.
Okay, so we have this ideal, this Stoic framework for mastering the 90% response. But the moment we try to put it into practice, we run smack into another internal obstacle, our own minds. These subtle unconscious biases.
The cognitive traps.
Right. We saw Anna remain stable, but most people, even really smart, capable people like Dave in the story, are still incredibly vulnerable to these mental shortcuts. Especially when the pressure's on, right? In a crisis, high stakes, no time.
That's exactly when they're most dangerous. Critical decision-making gets severely impaired by these biases. They're like heuristics, mental shortcuts the brain uses to save energy, which is useful sometimes, but under pressure, they can lead you right off a cliff.
And just knowing about them isn't enough, is it?
Generally, no. It's a crucial first step. But because many biases operate unconsciously, just being aware isn't a foolproof defense. We need more systematic approaches. The sources talk about needing organizational mechanisms, things they call cognitive repair, to actively minimize their effects.
Cognitive repair.
Okay.
We have a couple of really stark examples of huge organizations, tons of resources that weren't sunk by some external 10% event, but by a catastrophic failure of their own 90% judgment fueled by these mind traps. Let's start with Kodak.
Kodak. Yeah, their slide into quasi-bankruptcy around 2011 is just a classic case study. What's fascinating is they weren't blindsided technologically. They actually invented key parts of digital camera technology.
Right. So what went wrong?
Well, the analysis points heavily to extreme frame blindness. The executives, the board, they were so locked into the frame of analog photography, making money from selling film and chemicals, that they just couldn't see the bigger picture. They failed to grasp they were in the memory business, not the chemical business.
They couldn't reframe their own business model.
Right.
And that was amplified by overconfidence.
Absolutely. Decades of massive success with film created this deep-seated overconfidence in their existing technology and business model. That past success sort of emotionally vaccinated them against seeing the need for radical change, even when the evidence for the digital shift was mounting internally.
Wow.
They'd mastered the old 90% response so well, they literally couldn't conceive of or commit to the completely new 90% response the digital world required. That blind faith in what worked before ultimately doomed them.
Okay, another big one. Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, needed a colossal $45 billion bailout in 2008. What happened there? Was that also bias-driven?
Very much so, though maybe in a different way. RBS had this incredible run of successful mergers and acquisitions in the early 2000s. They were lauded for it.
Right.
But that very success, according to the analysis, led to dangerous emotional tagging. The positive feelings, the prestige, the bonuses tied to those past M&A wins created this powerful emotional feedback loop.
So they felt good about doing deals.
Exactly. And that positive emotional tag made the leadership progressively more risk-tolerant. They became overconfident in their own deal-making genius. It basically blurred their critical judgment. They started taking on more and more leverage, bigger and riskier acquisitions, like ABN, AMRO, right before the 2008 crash.
They ignored the warning signs because the feeling of doing deals was so positive.
Pretty much. The emotional tag M&A equals success and glory overrode the rational analysis of the mounting risks. Their 90% judgment was hijacked by past positive emotions.
Okay, so to help listeners maybe spot these traps in themselves or their teams, let's quickly define a few of the most common culprits that wreck that rational 90% response. First up, Anchoring.
Anchoring. Yeah, this is where an initial piece of information, often a number or a value mentioned early on, acts like an anchor, pulling subsequent judgments towards it, even if that initial piece of info isn't really relevant anymore.
Like the first price mentioned in a negotiation.
Exactly. Or, say, a budget for a project is initially floated at $1 million. That number becomes the anchor. Even if new data comes in showing it'll realistically cost $2.5 million to do it right, the team keeps trying to contort the plan back towards that $1 million anchor. It leads to rushed, under-resourced decisions because they can't mentally break free from that first number.
Got it. Okay, next. The sunk cost trap. This one feels painful.
It is painful. Sunk cost fallacy is the enemy of admitting you were wrong. It's our deep reluctance to accept that resources we've already spent, time, money, effort, emotional investment, are gone and can't be recovered.
So instead of cutting losses.
Instead of admitting, okay, this project isn't working, let's stop, you keep pouring more resources into the failing venture just to justify the investment you've already made. The psychological pain of saying I made a mistake makes you double down on the error, destroying any chance of a rational 90% course correction.
Ugh. Okay, another sneaky one, especially when we're overloaded with information, confirming evidence bias.
Or confirmation bias, yeah. This is our natural tendency to actively seek out, pay attention to, and favor information that confirms what we already believe or suspect.
And ignore the stuff that doesn't fit.
Exactly. We subconsciously ignore, downplay, or find flaws in information that contradicts our existing point of view. It feels good to be right, so we build this little echo chamber of data around our initial hunch, ensuring our potentially flawed judgment goes unchallenged.
Okay, and all these individual biases, they can get even worse in group settings, right? Through groupthink.
Oh, definitely. Groupthink is that dynamic where conformity and reaching consensus become more important to the team than critical thinking or raising objections. People don't want to rock the boat.
So everyone just nods along.
Pretty much. And when a team falls into groupthink, individual biases, like someone's anchoring effect or another person's confirmation bias, don't get challenged or corrected. Instead, they get amplified and validated by the group's silence or agreement. The final decision ends up being much worse because nobody played devil's advocate or pointed out the flaws.
So, if just being aware of biases isn't enough protection, what's the solution? How do organizations build that cognitive repair system you mentioned? How do we safeguard the 90% response?
Well, the shift needs to be from just focusing on individual training, telling people, here are the biases, watch out, towards actual organizational reengineering.
Yeah.
Using systems thinking to build safeguards into the decision-making process itself.
Like guardrails.
Exactly. Cognitive repair means building in layers of protection. Practically, this could mean things like mandatory critical review meetings at key milestones, or formally institutionalizing a devil's advocate role for major decisions, someone whose job it is to poke holes and challenge assumptions.
Okay.
It could mean using checklists for common decision types, or forcing teams to explicitly document and justify why they are choosing to ignore data that contradicts their preferred course of action. It's about building safety mechanisms into the process to compensate for our inherent human cognitive glitches, rather than just hoping individuals will overcome them on their own.
It's really fascinating when you realize these ancient Stoic ideas, tools designed thousands of years ago for achieving inner peace, are actually the philosophical bedrock for some of our most effective modern therapies. Let's talk about that connection, the synergy between Stoicism and modern mental health.
Yeah, it's a very direct lineage. It's widely recognized now that Stoicism is essentially the philosophical grandparent of therapies like Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT, and Aaron Beck's cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
How so? What's the core connection?
Well, that Stoic idea we talked about, the discipline of assent, the idea of stepping back and evaluating your initial impression rationally, what you might call rational detachment, that's the direct philosophical ancestor of the core technique in CBT, which is cognitive restructuring.
Okay.
Both Stoicism and CBT operate on that central insight from the Festinger principle. It's not the external event itself that causes our emotional distress.
Right. It's not the 10%.
It's what we believe about the event, our interpretation, our judgment. That's what creates the feeling, the 90% reaction. This is captured perfectly in the ABC model of REBT.
The ABC model. Remind us how that works.
Sure. A is the activating event, the thing that happens externally. AGA, screen dies, you get criticized. C is the emotional or behavioral consequence. AG, panic, anger, shutting down. Ellis's key insight was that A does not directly cause C.
Okay.
Instead, it's B, the individual's beliefs about A, that actually generate C. Your thoughts, your interpretations, your self-talk about the activating event are the crucial intermediary step.
So change the belief, change the consequence.
Exactly. You can use the iceberg metaphor here. What we see, the behavior and feelings, C, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The huge visible mass underneath the water, that's the B, the self-talk, the underlying beliefs, the judgments that are actually driving the whole thing. If you can identify and shift those beliefs, the emotional consequence changes, even if the activating event stays the same.
And within those beliefs, the sources we looked at make this really important distinction between cold cognitions and hot cognitions. Why does that matter?
It matters hugely because it tells you where to focus the therapeutic work or your own self-correction effort. Cold cognitions are more like factual statements or inferences. They might be inaccurate, like, I'll probably fail this presentation, but they don't usually trigger massive emotional upset on their own. They're easier to check against reality and adjust.
Okay, they're cooler, more objective.
Right. The real fuel for emotional disturbance, according to REBT-CBT, comes from hot cognitions. These are the really irrational, rigid, highly emotional appraisals. They often show up as absolute demands, I must succeed, awfulizing, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen, or global negative self-ratings, if I fail, I'm a total loser.
So back to Dave in the presentation. His cold cognition might be, the screen isn't working, this is disrupting things.
Right. Annoying, problematic, but maybe manageable. His hot cognition, the one causing the meltdown, is likely something like, this presentation must go perfectly. If it doesn't, it's an unbearable catastrophe, and it proves I'm incompetent and worthless.
Ah, the absolutist demands and the self-condemnation.
Exactly. It's that hot, irrational appraisal, the demandingness, the awfulizing, the self-rating that REBT theory says is pretty much necessary for intense emotional disturbance to occur. So therapy and Stoic practice aims directly at identifying, challenging, and modifying those hot cognitions to neutralize that destructive 90% reaction.
That makes sense. Now, for achieving that kind of emotional grounding, separating yourself from those hot reactions, there's another really practical, almost surgical tool mentioned, this one from Adlerian psychology, the principle of task separation.
Task separation. Yes, it's incredibly powerful. It's a way to achieve freedom from one of the biggest sources of our emotional instability. Worrying about what other people think of us, seeking external approval.
Which ties us in knots.
Completely. When we let other people's opinions, judgments, or potential evaluations dictate our own sense of worth, our inner stability just goes out the window. Adlerian psychology offers this tool to dissect emotional ownership. The core idea is simple but profound. Your life, your choices, your actions, that's your task. How other people evaluate you or your life, that is entirely their task.
My task versus their task.
Exactly. And you have absolutely zero control over their task. Trying to control what they think is like trying to control the weather. It's futile and exhausting.
It sounds simple, but really internalizing that feels like it could be revolutionary.
There's a therapeutic story about this, wasn't there? A man with anxiety about his in-laws.
Yes, a great example. This man suffered from terrible chronic anxiety, specifically terrified of what his in-laws thought of him. He'd feel physically sick before family gatherings, just consumed by trying to manage their impression of him, totally focused on controlling the uncontrollable 10%, their internal judgments. His therapist introduced task separation, asked him simply, whose task is it to approve of you? Yours or theirs? And that clicks for him.
It was a light bulb moment. He realized their judgment, their approval or disapproval was their task. It was entirely outside his sphere of influence. He'd been fighting this impossible battle that wasn't even his to fight.
So what did he do? How did his focus shift?
His focus shifted immediately to his own 90% response, his own task. What could he control? He decided his task was simply to be a polite guest, be himself, and be a supportive partner to his spouse during the visit. That's it. He could 100% control his own manners, his own actions, his own contribution to the evening.
And the next visit?
The next time he went, he focused only on executing his task, being polite, engaging pleasantly. When his father-in-law inevitably made some critical comment, instead of spiraling into anxiety, the old 90% reaction, he calmly acknowledged it, recognized, okay, that's his task, his opinion, and just gently changed the subject.
And the outcome?
The anecdote says he felt immediately stable. He managed the interaction without the usual internal turmoil and, remarkably, left their house without a migraine for the first time ever. He hadn't changed his in-laws one bit, but by rigorously separating the tasks, he had reclaimed his own emotional sovereignty.
Wow. That's the goal, isn't it? That kind of grounding. So for listeners who want to bring this blend of Stoicism and CBT into their daily lives, to get better at managing their 90%, what are some practical techniques they can actually use?
Well, two stand out as particularly effective and well aligned with these principles. First, cognitive journaling.
Okay.
This is very much like the evening reflection the Stoic philosopher Seneca practiced.
How does it work?
At the end of the day, or after a challenging event, you take a few minutes to write down what happened, the A, your initial automatic thoughts and feelings, the B and C, and then you actively apply that discipline of assent. You ask yourself, okay, what would a rational observer say about this? Was my initial thought truly accurate? What were the hot cognitions involved? How could I have thought about or responded to this differently, more constructively?
So it's like reviewing the tape and finding the healthier perspective.
Exactly. Doing this regularly helps you become much more aware of your patterns and consciously practice restructuring those unhelpful beliefs over time. It builds emotional clarity.
Okay, and the second technique, you mentioned it might feel jarring, but it's effective. Negative visualization.
Yes, or what Stoics might call premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils. It sounds counterintuitive maybe because we usually try to avoid thinking about bad things happening.
Right, push worries away.
But negative visualization asks you to do the opposite, deliberately. You take a few moments in a calm state to realistically imagine a plausible negative event happening. Maybe you miss an important deadline, maybe you face a significant financial setback, maybe you experience public criticism.
Okay, and then what? Just wallow in it?
No, not at all. The key is then you meticulously think through, okay, if that did happen, how would I cope? What internal resources could I draw on? What practical steps could I take to navigate the situation? What strengths of character would I need?
So you rehearse your response in advance.
Precisely. By mentally walking through the worst-case scenario and planning your 90% response before it happens, you significantly reduce the fear and anxiety associated with uncertainty. It's like an internal inoculation against panic. When the 10% event actually occurs, even if it's bad, there's a part of you that thinks, okay, I've considered this, I have a plan, I know how to handle this. It builds incredible psychological preparedness. And thinking longer term, this isn't just about individual adults fixing their reactions. If we really want to build a more resilient society, we need to think about how we foster these skills proactively, especially in young people.
Right, bringing these ideas into education.
Exactly. There's a growing movement to integrate principles from Stoicism and CBT into educational curricula, right from K-12 up through university. The goal is to explicitly teach emotional intelligence, proactive coping skills, and how to manage that 90% response when faced with adversity.
We have a really good story about this from a high school setting. High school, talk about pressure, where one bad grade can feel like the end of the world. This shows how a teacher can help shift that 90% response.
Yeah, consider a typical scenario. A bright high school math student totally bombs a critical exam. That bad grade, that's the uncontrollable 10% event. Her automatic 90% reaction was probably intense shame, maybe panic, thinking things like, I'm a failure, I'll never get into a good college now. Viewing the grade not just as a score, but as a final verdict on her intelligence and her entire future. Classic hot cognitions taking over.
Okay. So how did the teacher intervene using these ideas?
Well, a teacher informed by these principles wouldn't just console her or say, try harder. They'd help her reframe the meaning of the grade, help her apply that discipline of assent. The key intervention might be asking a question like, okay, that's the grade you got, but what if this grade isn't a verdict on you? What if it's just data?
Data, not judgment.
Exactly. Shifting the frame from this grade defines me to this grade gives me information. That simple cognitive reframe can be incredibly powerful. It helps the student see the external 10% event, the bad score, as a neutral, objective signal, rather than a personal catastrophe.
And her 90% response changes.
Completely. It shifts from the paralyzing thought, I must be stupid, to a rational, controllable, action-oriented thought. Okay, the data shows I struggled with this type of geometry problem. What steps can I take now? I need to adjust my study approach for this topic, maybe ask for extra help.
The teacher is essentially teaching her how to turn an external setback into internal, actionable information. That is teaching resilience.
It's the very definition of it. You're equipping students with the mental tools to navigate inevitable challenges constructively.
Now, this approach, this blend of ancient philosophy and modern emotional intelligence concepts, it's actually being studied academically, right? Especially in leadership programs. But there's been some tension, some disagreement about Stoicism's role.
Yeah, there has been. Historically, if you looked at some of the academic literature on emotional intelligence, EI, Stoicism often got a bad rap. It was sometimes dismissed or even seen as undesirable because it got conflated with emotional repression. You know, the stereotype of the Stoic as this cold, unfeeling robot who suppresses everything.
Why did that happen? Was it how they were measuring it?
That seems to be a big part of it. Some of the earlier academic scales used to measure Stoic disposition, like one called the Liverpool Stoicism Scale, LSS, tended to focus on things like whether someone preferred not to show emotion or disliked talking about feelings. That kind of measurement really misses the point of the philosophy.
Because Stoicism isn't about not having emotions.
Exactly. It's about managing them. It advocates for emotional regulation or control, not emotional absence or repression. So measuring it by lack of expression was fundamentally misunderstanding the goal.
Okay, but newer research, especially looking at leadership students, seems to be getting more nuanced. What are those studies finding about the real value of Stoic behaviors for developing leaders?
Right. The newer research is more careful. One interesting study looked at undergraduate leadership students. It found that while the overall correlation between scoring high on those older Stoicism scales and general emotional intelligence wasn't statistically significant, kind of confirming the earlier confusion, when they drilled down into specific competencies, they found something important. Stoic behaviors showed a significant positive relationship with key self-management aspects of EI. Specifically, things like adaptability and emotional self-control.
So not necessarily correlated with, say, expressing empathy, but strongly correlated with managing your own internal state.
Precisely. That distinction is crucial. The positive findings seem to confirm that when you measure Stoicism in terms of the ability to regulate your internal reactions, to stay calm under pressure, to think clearly despite anxiety, then it's actually a profound asset for leaders.
So the negative findings might have been measuring the unhealthy suppression linked to the 10% event, while the positive findings capture the healthy regulation of the 90% response.
That seems like a very plausible interpretation. That ability to control your own strong emotions, to maintain composure, that's absolutely non-negotiable for effective leadership, isn't it? Especially today in fast-moving, often chaotic environments.
Yeah, you need that stability.
It allows leaders to step back, think clearly, endure the anxiety that comes with making tough decisions, and have the mental flexibility to consider new ideas or take necessary risks without being emotionally hijacked. That emotional self-control, that mastery of the 90% is a massive competitive advantage. It lets you learn from experience rather than just reacting to it.
So in the end, that ability to stay still and effective when crisis hits, whether you're Anna in that boardroom or Petra dealing with that supply chain mess, it really just comes down to this radical, maybe even daily commitment to mastering your 90%. It's about seizing control of the one domain that is absolutely non-negotiably yours.
It really is that fundamental philosophical pivot, isn't it? Shifting your focus from the external world you can't control to the internal world you can. You know, that immense weight, that psychological distress you feel when something bad happens externally, that 10%. So much of that weight is actually just the energy you're burning. Fighting reality, fighting the uncontrollable. Mastery comes from letting go of that fight, radically surrendering to the external fact, accepting it as it is, and then pouring all your energy into commanding your response, your 90%. That's where your true power lies. And remember, emotional stability isn't about feeling nothing. It's about clarity of command amidst the feelings. The real measure of your resilience isn't how hard the storm hits you, but the unshakable rhythm you maintain within your own inner core.
That's been our deep dive into the 90% rule and the stillness of emotional sovereignty.